Hi, everyone. Welcome to USJ's panel for this year's UCLA Undergraduate Research Week. And we're really excited to have four of our staff members here to talk about both their time in USJ and also as student researchers at UCLA. So we're just going to get right into it. Can we have all of our panelists introduce ourselves? And me and Jessica will be moderating this panel. So we'll just briefly say our little spiel and then we'll go into our panelists. So I'm
Hi,
Callista. Oh,
sorry, go
no
ahead.
worries. I'm Callista. I'm one of the co-EICs this year.
I'm Jessica. I'm also co-EIC along with Callista.
My name is Anshul Ratnaparkhi, and I'm on the editorial board, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
My name is Chris. I'm a general member of the review board, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
My name is Grace. I'm a third year, currently serving as AME or Assistant Managing Editor of the Review Board. I go by she, her.
Hi, my name is Tim Sisneros. I'm on the layout board. I go by with he, him, his.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So can all of our panelists kind of talk about their research experience, a brief summary of what you do, and then also if you haven't already stated your position in USJ.
So I work in research involving the cross-section of neuroscience and neurosurgery and machine learning. So a lot of what my lab does is implement different methods, including like machine learning and artificial intelligence into neurosurgery research to optimize procedures. And I've been working at that since my freshman year in 2018, and it's been amazing so far.
I've been working in Dr. Paulson's atmospheric chemistry lab in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. My research generally involves anything related to reactive oxygen species. So I've done things from like assaying particulate matter samples to currently working on an HPLC project.
My bench research is with Dr. Elaine Shao of the Physiology Department, and I'm also involved in clinical research with the International Circle of Genetic Studies at UCLA, as well as the Emergency Medicine Research Associates at Ronald Reagan.
I've had research experience prior to being at UCLA, working with the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, where I worked on a particular species of solanum from the Channel Islands and trying to figure out where it was placed in phylogenetic context. At UCLA, I work at the Braybrook lab, where the lab focuses on plant and algal cell wall mechanics. What my focus is on Arabidopsis pavement cells right now, and using pavement cell size and shape characteristics to map plants within a phylogenetic context.
Very cool. These are all really cool projects. So let's dive right in. I know that there are many different avenues to get into research. So how did you all first get involved with research here at UCLA?
So my experience was honestly, I feel like pretty easy. I shadowed the neurosurgery department because I was a part of another organization called ARC. And part of the benefits of that program is you get to round with the neurosurgeons. And so I just struck up a conversation with one and ended up joining the lab.
I was in a program called Peers. I think you'd have to join before you even come to UCLA, so it might not be possible for most people. Peers wasn't actually what helping with research. They do get students into research, but I went on a faster timeline. And for like a lot of students, I just like cold emailed a professor and expressed interest in their work. And she was kind enough to give me an opportunity to work in her lab.
For me, I joined all my research opportunities my first year through various methods. I think the International Circle, as well as EMRA, is just through a club application process. They're registered UCLA organizations that partake in research activities. So ICGS, or the Circle, recruits every fall, and EMRA recruits every fall and spring. And then I learned about the microbiome. I do microbiome research through one of my lower div classes. And then I was really fascinated by it. Fortunately for me, like looking for a microbiome lab was very easy. There was only a few at UCLA. So I just cold emailed Dr. Shao and she took me in her lab.
For me, it was when I was doing the transfer summer program through the AAP. When I was transferring into UCLA this past summer, one of the classes that I'd taken was Student Research Forum Honors 101A. And at the end of it, we got to talk with, or we had presentations from several different PIs around UCLA. And my professor sought out a plant based PI, if you will, plant sciences based PI, because I was the only person interested in plants. And so they brought this PI on who I recognized from watching YouTube videos of her talking about plant cell wall. So I reached out to her afterwards, and she gave me a shot, and I was in the lab by the fall.
Very cool, all different avenues into research. So that being said, you guys are not only researchers, but students too. How do you guys manage classes and research?
So I think it's all about just like managing time and prioritizing what needs to come first. So like if I have a big research deadline, I will do that and like put off schoolwork, and it's just about managing everything well, I think.
I guess it depends on what kind of research you do. I find what works best for me is to schedule designated lab days, or at least try to schedule my classes so that I have a really long time block where I can just spend all my time in the lab. And then after that, I can just put the lab work aside and focus on my assignments and stuff.
Yeah, same here. Definitely requires time management skills, but it's definitely not impossible. I think it's much better to set or kind of reflect on each quarter, like how much time do you think you'll need to dedicate to lab or your research activities that quarter, and plan your classes accordingly. And similar to Chris, for me, I found it much easier to have, larger chunks between classes as opposed to like small 1 hour chunks, like awkward gaps in between. So I try to plan my classes that way to maximize the amount of time I can spend on essays and experiments.
Yeah, pretty much have to agree with everybody else, especially for this past quarter when we started being allowed, undergrad started being allowed back in the labs. I section off my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as being particularly the heaviest chunk of course loads, usually in the morning time, and then which leaves me either the rest of the day, but also Tuesdays and Thursdays is free days to go into the lab and then do any work. But yeah, prioritizing school and research can be tough because you really want to do the research and you want to get stuff done, but you know that you need to do the coursework, and it's tough, but it absolutely is manageable. And I'm sure like the rest of us, we probably have a pretty heavy course load as well going along with it.
Yep, definitely easier said than done. That being said, are there any classes that you've taken at UCLA that have improved your research skills?
I honestly think a lot of the upper division classes are really helpful for research because a lot of it is learning like different research techniques that are like up and coming in our specific fields. So for me, I think neuroscience, like the Core 101 series has been very helpful in teaching me a lot of those methods.
I think that instructional labs do help, but it depends on how difficult your lab work is. I find that my lab work requires a lot more precision than the instructional labs do. I guess those classes are kind of like, they prep you, but they may not exactly replicate what you would do in the lab.
I think for me, I took a class with the program called the Undergraduate Science Fellowship Program, URFP, or Undergraduate Research Fellows Program with Dr. Goins. And with that program, you take a seminar where she teaches you, all of the unspoken professional skills that a lot of people have to learn on your own. But it was really nice to have someone kind of tell you explicitly, these are the skills that you might not think that you need, but you actually should definitely pay attention to work on, how to ask research questions, how to craft personal statements, and just overall like how to deal with being a person in science. That was definitely a class that helped me in my research skills, but I guess a class that's more open to everyone. Yeah, like what people said, your upper division science classes, especially if you're a life science major, really heavily focus on reading papers or asking research questions, or even when you're kind of crafting your own reports for your upper division classes, it really gives you a chance to like ask those rigorous questions, to critically evaluate scientific literature, and those skills directly translate into your work in the lab.
For me, I've got a few classes. The first one being that Honors 101A class I took in the summertime with Dr. Turlo. And the other one, or another one that's really helped out was statistics. If anybody here has to evaluate data and use programs like R or doing any Python script, it could be a little challenging if you don't know how to work your way around it, especially because handling the data and knowing how to input it, it can be challenging. So the statistics course is really great for that. But also one that's really helped me out is programming courses. I've taken some in C++ at just because the type of critical thinking that you have to do to get through those kind of problems or try to figure out those kind of or the solutions to those problems are really helpful in trying to investigate certain types of problems in your research.
Very cool. So research is hardly ever a linear pathway. So I guess our question to you is, what is one of the biggest failures that you've experienced during your research experience here, and how did you approach it, and what did you learn from it?
So for me, I remember working very hard on one paper and I really put like my heart and soul into it, and it didn't get accepted by the journal that I was targeting. And I think that although that like kind of upset me right away, in the long haul, I got all the critique from the different reviewers and it helped a lot improve my writing in the long term, I think.
I think one of the, I won't call it exactly a failure, but like a really long struggle is that project that I'm working on right now. HPLC is a really difficult or kind of annoying technique to work with. And I started the project at the beginning of this quarter and I'm still dealing with a lot of issues. But I think the one thing that I learned from this is that perseverance is key in research and you can't always expect things to go your way.
Yeah, similar experience. I think the hardest part for me was like doing what are even, I think, 2 quarters of research just to not end up having results. Or I think I try to develop this assay to measure like a gas content in a sample, and it just wasn't working. And like parts of the assay was working and it was kind of working sequentially, but you know, taking it as a whole, it just wasn't looking too hot by the end of the quarter. And I had to write my SRP paper on that, like, oh, I didn't really get any results. And what I learned from that quarter was like not to pursue that assay and kind of move the research project in a different direction. And I think it happens to the best of us, and it's definitely a learning point where you know, you spend so much time on developing this thing for what, like 10-20 weeks, and not to have it in the final paper, or not to be able to pursue that avenue in your research question is kind of a shame, but it's something that we all face for sure.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest failure I had is when I was doing research with the Botanic Garden back in Santa Barbara, and I had to develop certain morphological measurement protocols for these leaf measurements and flower measurements by using an existing protocol and then adding to it. And at the end of everything, none of my measurements were used inside of the analysis because they were found to be irrelevant, and only partially the other ones are used. But on top of that, the techniques that you have to develop. So PCR was a really tough one for me. It took me several months to fully get how to actually amplify DNA, right? But once I was able to get that done, then I was able to develop techniques like with RNA-seq and other techniques as well. So just really persevering through that kind of stuff is a big challenge.
I mean, they do say PCR stands for pipette, cry, repeat. I think we can all we can all attest to that. I think it's really cool that you guys all have very unique research experiences in a shared undergrad environment here at UCLA. That being said, what careers are you currently considering, and how has your research experience influenced your career decision?
So for me, I always wanted to be a doctor, like since high school, and I had dreams of attending medical school, and that still holds true now. But I think that my experience in research has shown me that it's such like a cool thing to do because you're literally doing things that get written in textbooks. You know, like you're doing stuff that other people learn. And because of that, I think that I really do want to have research be like a big part of my career, and I want to work in like academic medicine.
I am planning to attend graduate school, and my vague goal right now is to become a principal researcher in industry at one point, but I don't know exactly what in yet. I know it's chemistry because that's my major. My research influenced my goal in that because from what I've seen, it's getting harder to progress in your career with only a bachelor's degree. And if you do only have a bachelor's, you might be relegated or you might be restricted to like only an associate scientist position for a while before moving up. And for some people, that's okay, but your autonomy in that position will be limited. So that's why I want to pursue research so that I can overcome that ceiling or avoid that ceiling in the future.
I am currently applying to medical school. It's a very exciting time of the year. And while I do hope to pursue an MD, I also wish to stay in academic medicine. I think research is definitely been an avenue that satisfy like my intellectual curiosities. There's always really cool things I want to learn about that are clinically applicable, which is part of the reason why I joined a microbiome lab and I continue doing research with clinical organizations. And I think research just gives you so many critical thinking skills that are really vital to any profession, and being curious, like just as a person is always like a really great aspect, and just like learning more about the world. I think one of my favorite parts about research is like when you find something, it's kind of like a little secret that you have with the world that no one else knows. And I think that's something that's really special about research.
Yeah, I'll be pursuing a professorship as after I go to grad school. I want to eventually leave my own lab and be a principal investigator. And just like Anshul said, that to contribute back, and I think it's just really awesome to be able to contribute to basic or fundamental science in a way that other people can learn from you. And I do want to teach, and I would also like to contribute back to the sciences in the way that it's contributed to me. So that's what I would want to do.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing kind of your research experience at UCLA. So now we're going to try to transition a little bit into more USJ specific questions. So for anyone in the audience who isn't currently in USJ, undergraduate science journal. So the structure of our staff, we have 3 separate boards. We have review board, editorial board, and layout board. And each of our boards is kind of modeled after the general scientific peer review process. So my first question to the panel is, can you describe your role in USJ and what your board does during this process? And for this question, we can kind of switch up the speaking order to how we kind of work throughout the year. So we'll start with review board and then review AME and then editorial and then layout.
I can go first as part of the review board. Again, I was the assistant managing editor of the review board, and I've loved working with the board throughout the entire year. So my role in USJ is serving as a liaison between the managing editor as well as the general review board members. The bulk of our work is, in addition to reviewing our own articles, we compile the reviewer comments into finalized letters that are then sent to authors, and we kind of help the authors along revising their papers and eventually hopefully bring them for acceptance into the journal.
As a general member, I can get into like the nitty gritty of the review process. What we do is evaluate the scientific content and accuracy of the paper, and that is different from what editorial does. That involves things like commenting on whether a figure is clear enough or whether it's formatted correctly, whether someone's analysis was structured in a way that's easy to follow or that's logically sound, or even going into the sources that they cited in case there's something kind of suspicious about some kind of information they mentioned. So just making sure that whatever the written content is as scientifically viable as possible.
So as a member of editorial, what we do is kind of edit for the flow and to make sure that everything is properly cited in academic formatting. So a lot of what I do is I go through and like make sure that the words flow well and to like keep things under word count. And honestly, for me, I think it's really fun to like just try and improve writing and like go through multiple times and like see how well we can make things flow. So that's what I do.
On the layout board, what we do is we get the stuff from editorial and we will put it into a essentially a template that's based off of a feedback from everybody on the layout board, which is then fed back to the other board directors. And yeah, I mean, my role on the board is to work with an amazing, small group of people who like to collaborate and look at how the layout of the article is going to be. That was actually one of the best parts about this. It was kind of deciding like, oh, cool, like we could take these different approaches from different scientific articles and different journals and apply it to the USJ format. And it was really cool to see this whole process go on because we could decide that and implement it. And it was it was a good time. But yeah, we just a lot of nitty gritty fitting pictures and asking authors for higher resolution photos and changing around stuff if you need to. But a lot of really kind of fitting it, make it look nice.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely takes a village to produce the journal every year, and there are a lot of moving parts, and we're really lucky to have a really large and diverse staff. So based on your experience in USJ, how do you think being a part of this organization has improved your own research skills?
So I know editorial has done a lot of like different writing workshops, and thank you to James for all of those. And I think that's honestly really helped improve my writing, and that's something I've always prided myself on is just being a very good writer. And through being in USJ, we've learned like specific rules and how to format things correctly, and that's honestly really helped me professionally and personally.
Yeah, I agree with what he just said. Writing is a really important part of the scientific process because no matter how good you are at research, if you're unable to communicate your findings, then the research you do won't have any point to it. Being part of the review board, I guess that helps me like critically self-reflect on what I'm writing as I'm writing it, because sometimes it's hard to really critique yourself and I guess judge your work in an unbiased way.
Yeah, and in addition to the writing skills that you gain, from reading the articles, you identify really great examples of things that you think are written really well. And it's like, oh, I really wish I could communicate my results that clearly as well. And sometimes you have examples where you can do better, like the author can do better, and you help them with that. In addition to the writing process, I always think it's really nice to be able to expand your repertoire, I guess, by reading articles not in your field, although we try to match members to, I guess, their proclaimed like field of expertise. That doesn't happen all the time. And I always find it a joy to be able to read articles even outside of my research field and being able to learn about that and how results are depicted. And I don't know, there's a lot of nuances to when you read things that are not familiar to you that you learn a lot from. So that's what I also appreciate from USJ.
For me, it's a mix of things. One is I think that there was within our group, I thought we built a pretty great community. There was there's no hostility, but I think everybody got along really well and we're able to bounce different ideas off each other, and that's really important in most scientific or academic environments. And so that really helped out. Just contributing to that. But another thing, which is I thought was interesting, is I had been a graphic designer prior to being on the USJ layout board, and even while looking at the different articles that people had submitted, their different images that they sent in, their different figures, realizing the certain nuances that might be important in a scientific article versus more of an artistic perspective, I think is, it'll allow me to create better figures and more direct or easier to communicate figures in the future. So that was a big part for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Scientific communication is something that's super important and we harp on it all the time. So building off of you all talking about writing and how important that is, how important do you think writing and publishing a paper is at the undergraduate level? And has that opinion changed with your USJ experience?
I think it honestly is an experience that everyone should do if they have the opportunity to, because I think that it's something that you can take pride in knowing that like you really worked hard on something and that got put out and like everyone can read it and it's going to impact the world. So I think that everyone should try to do that. And I think joining USJ has definitely shown me that so many people are passionate about different projects. And I feel like seeing it published is just, it's so prideful and it's such like a feel good feeling knowing that like you really worked hard and you were able to put something out to help the world.
Yeah, from all the research advisors that I've discussed with, I don't think it's that common for an undergraduate to be able to publish their own research, and it's especially less common for them to be the first author on a paper. But if you're able to accomplish that, that's more power to you. It will look better in your resume, and it will be a testament to how good of a researcher you are.
Yeah, I think publishing and writing, even writing, an SRP paper it's a really big accomplishment, right? Like you're reflecting on a culmination of your quarter's work and being able to communicate those results and kind of drawing upon what you've learned is a really big accomplishment in and of itself. And I think because we have the USJ at UCLA, like of course I would want to encourage everyone who is doing scientific research to submit their work, and so we can celebrate with them, and we as reviewers love to celebrate your accomplishments. And one of my favorite things about the journal is like as a reviewer, I love to share the excitement that authors have for their research, and being able to share that with the UCLA community is really a pleasure. So because we have USJ, I really encourage everyone to get publishing experience. Our journal is registered in the Library of Congress, which is really cool. And you can never go wrong. Just like submit your article and we'd love to read it.
I think it's important to try to publish a paper. If you are lucky enough to be in a research lab and you're fortunate enough to be able to produce results from your research, you should absolutely give it a try to publish it, because your PI is going to try to. But at the undergraduate level, having something like USJ, I think provides more accessibility to that. And while it's not being peer reviewed by these different PIs around the world, it's still being peer reviewed by your peers at UCLA, who are still going to be strict and give you a run for your money, if you will, on really trying to make sure and shake out some of the issues that you might have in your work. And so this experience, I think, would be invaluable to anybody who's trying to go into academia or even go into even the private scientific center, because it's going to allow you to be able to communicate your science better. It'll give you skills in how to submit articles. It's not that much different than it might be than other journals, except for depending on it, there might be a fee or something. No fee associated here. And then, ultimately, the USJ experience has not changed my opinion on publishing a paper at the undergraduate level, but it has opened my eyes up to it being way more accessible to do so, because it's hard to get the research you need to be able to actually get enough research or results to be able to publish your work in such a short amount of time. For me as a transfer, I have 2 years, and most transfers aren't even in a lab until maybe their second year. I was fortunate enough to get in it the first year, and still I don't have enough to be able to get it enough results to be able to get something published this year. But who knows? Maybe next year I would, and I definitely would try to submit it through the USJ prior.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything the panelists have said. And just to add on to that, the USJ also accepts review papers, so that doesn't require original study results. So that's an avenue too if you want to get something published, but maybe you're not actively pursuing like your own research study or have results yet. Yeah, so kind of as we're wrapping up the year, what would you say your motivation for you joining USJ initially was, and where we are now? What do you think you've ultimately gained from your experience?
So I honestly joined USJ just to improve my writing like professionally and to kind of have a bigger say in research in terms of what goes on at UCLA. And I think that being a member of editorial for sure like gave me that experience, and I think I definitely improved my writing. And also it was very nice like getting to work with other people who are equally as passionate about this.
I had a similar goal. I wanted to improve my writing, and after joining USJ, my work with the review board has led to improvements in my writing. It's also led to improvements in my patience, or at least perseverance, because there are a lot of papers to read. And I think the amount of papers that a student reads just increases throughout their career. So this is kind of conditioning me.
I joined USJ to get a sense of what the review process was like. I think to undergraduates, it's always like a mysterious cloud. Like how do papers go from benchtop to publication? I think that was something that I was always really interested in and interested in learning more about. And that's definitely something that I've gained from USJ, kind of demystifying that whole process and gaining a lot of respect for even reviewers. I think sometimes PIs are like, oh, I got called to peer review like this paper, like these few papers, and you never really know what goes into that process and the amount of effort that they put into providing reviewer comments for those things. So it's been really great to know what it feels like to be your own reviewer.
Yeah, for me, I wanted to just get behind the scenes of the whole publication process. Yeah, I was very ignorant to the entire process before, and ultimately I wanted to see, at least from a perspective, which I knew it wouldn't be exactly like a huge, a huge journal, like Scientific or Cell or something like that, or Nature. But we're a pretty big group of people that are doing this, and so USJ still provides a huge, or at least it still has provided a huge amount of what I'm assuming is very similar to the amount of the type of things that is going on behind the scenes. But I also wanted to join because, as most of us undergraduates have done, we've read a ton of scientific articles at this point. And I always used to see little things that always were like, oh, I didn't like the way that this was formatted, or I didn't like the way that why, like, is there a border there? Or I didn't like the figure quality or something like that. And so I really wanted to be able to try to put my, I wanted to try it and see, like, okay, well, if I'm criticizing these things in my head, then maybe I should try it to see if I can. And I was fortunate enough to get accepted to the layout board for that reason. So.
Yeah, and we're all super happy to have everyone on this panel and our staff. So what would you say is your most memorable experience thus far in USJ?
For me, I think it was honestly just getting to work with everyone, and it was nice just being able to talk to the people that are, as I said before, so passionate about what they do. And so I guess like gung ho with research and just like happy to like contribute. And I think that it's very nice just seeing other people share that passion.
I think the most memorable moment was just when we finished reviewing for the quarter, which kind of sounds it was kind of bad, but I guess there's just like a wave of relief knowing that I didn't review any more papers and that everyone in the review board, I guess, accomplished their job.
My most memorable experience was last year. I helped review a review paper about the TIPS procedure. I can't say the full name, I'm going to butcher it, but it's a procedure to connect veins in your body, essentially. And then that article was nominated as like the best review article. We nominate the best research article and the best review article of the year, and just seeing being able to share the excitement of that author, like, oh my gosh, I helped them write this paper and it got published in our journal and it got voted to be the best, and that was really exciting and heartwarming for me.
The most memorable experience for me was the collaboration that we had done as the layout board when we were going back and forth. And I think Victoria Lee had actually done, I think, a really good job at getting us into really collaborating with each other and getting us into this environment where we were really putting in our, our opinions and they were actually taking them into consideration. And it was really cool to see how everybody's ideas were actually implemented into the final template that was used for this year's USJ. And yeah, I mean, that was for me the most memorable experience. There is another thing, but that was mostly trying to get a hold of all of my authors to get higher resolution images for their figures, which seemed to take up a bulk amount of the time in some cases. But other than that, yeah, it was definitely the collaboration to feel like the work that you put in was actually seen. And that was really rewarding.
Yeah, we love to hear all of that. Thank you for sharing your experience in USJ. And again, we're super happy to have all of you as a part of our staff this year. And the rest of the session, we can kind of take questions from the audience if there are any. So if you want to drop them in the chat, we can read them out loud, direct them to panelists. But while people are typing or just thinking of questions, if panelists, you can leave off one piece of advice for undergraduates who are thinking about starting research. Do you have any words of wisdom you want to pass down to them?
So honestly, I would say just like get involved and like have fun with it. Like find a project that you genuinely are passionate about. And there's so many like interesting projects being done at UCLA. And as you can tell from like the four of us that we do so many different like projects. So find something that you're interested in, just like go for it and like try your hardest and just have fun.
In addition to finding something that you're interested in, you should avoid settling for any project, because if you join a lab simply because they're the first one to accept you, you might end up stuck doing research that you don't particularly enjoy. And on top of that, you should also make sure that you vibe well with like the graduate mentor and PI. Social relations are important. I guess that it's kind of weird to say that social relations are important in research, but if you're not in a supportive environment for your research, you won't be able to do very good work.
My advice would probably be to ask questions. I think that's a really common thing to suggest, but it's really, really underappreciated, especially when you're an undergraduate. Like, no question is a dumb question. Like, I cannot emphasize that enough. And even I remember like being so scared to ask questions because it's like, oh, was I supposed to know that already? Or like, of course not, like you're just beginning in research and no one expects you to be a master of your field, especially as an undergraduate. So if you're scared to ask that question, like don't be, just ask it and you'll thank yourself later. It's better to ask them now than to ask them in grad school or when you're a PI yourself, and even then, you never stop learning. So I'd just say to stay curious. And that's one of the most valuable things that you can remember.
Just to piggyback a little bit off of Grace, absolutely. Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to say you don't know. That's advice I give as a tutor as well as in life in general. But that's something I think it's a huge thing. It's something that not everybody really, or some people maybe take for granted because you want to impress or you want to, show the knowledge that you've gained from your classes, but it's okay to not know, and it is okay to ask those questions. The other really big piece of advice I would say is don't be afraid to step out of your element. For me, joining the lab that I'm in, my research interests are aligned with one particular subsect of the entire research that goes on this in the lab that I'm in right now. But why I chose this lab wasn't because it aligned with my research interests. It was because I was able to expand my research techniques within the same field relatively. This is an MCDB lab and I'm an ecology, behavior, and evolution major. So there are some issues involving that, but really when it comes down to it, the skills that I'm picking up from this lab are going to be a lot more applicable later on in grad school, and it's really about the experience that you get, and not always about what kind of research you're doing. So don't be afraid to, if you're like, I really want to do this, but it's not in my field or it's not something that maybe you aren't that familiar with. that should potentially be more reason why you would want to try. It's kind of the reason, the whole reason behind postdoc fellowship. So maybe try to get that in a little bit early.
Right. I think Chris kind of mentioned this, that you don't really want to say yes to the first lab that accepts you. And Tim, you kind of touched on this right now, but what would you tell students who are worried about not really knowing what research field to pick? And what advice would you give them along the lines of that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
No, sure. So how would you advise students who are worried about not really knowing what research field to pursue?
I would say like you can honestly like read research articles on a ton of different topics that you think you're interested in, and just see like if you would find yourself enjoying doing that research. And honestly, like even if you do end up in a lab that like you're not super passionate about and you figure that out after joining, you can always join another one like the next year. Like there's no like rule that you need to stay in one lab your entire life.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any way to vet or like to evaluate whether or not you'll truly enjoy the research field until you actually do research in that field. But the best thing you could do to try to make an informed decision is maybe talk to professors during office hours, watch YouTube videos, or just talk to TAs and really try to get an idea of what a day-to-day in the life of a researcher in that field is like.
Yeah, similar. If you are eyeing labs and you're kind of in between a few that you haven't reached out to yet, it might be helpful to read some other papers that they've worked on and going into like methods specifically, because that's actually like what they did and the experiments that they personally ran. If you are accepted into lab and you're kind of choosing between some, don't be afraid to ask like, what does a typical day in the lab look like, or conduct, I guess, like an informal informational interview, just asking like, what do you expect of me? What do you anticipate me doing? And especially in the beginning, you'll be heavily mentored, hopefully, from someone else in the lab. And if you speak to them up front and ask them, what exactly are you going to be doing in part of this larger project, I think that would be really helpful, and it will save you a lot of stress in the long run.
I 100% agree with Grace. That's exactly what I was going to say. Really, what you need to do is look at the methods papers, or the method sections of papers, and not just like one, but several, because what every single research project is going to have different methods, and you'll be surprised at the different techniques that might go on, the diversity of techniques that go on in one lab. And even if you were to go and visit a lab, you might not realize that some of the things that aren't in that lab are still used. They're using other stuff outside of the lab. I know for us, we don't have a confocal microscope, but almost a lot of the research we do is on a confocal, and it's across the other side of the building in somebody else's lab. And so just know that, or really, if you want to understand and really get to the nitty gritty of what that lab does, you need to read the method section. It's just the only only way to be able to do so. But if you're really not sure of really what you're going to want to pick, is just think back and look. If you can read a research paper and not get bored halfway through, then you're probably in a good spot to be like, that is interesting. And so maybe just mark that down and check that off. Okay, maybe I'm really interested in this kind of topic.
Very true. So I know that coming into UCLA as a freshman myself, I knew that I wanted to get into research, but I didn't understand exactly what it entailed. So my question to you guys is, what is the expected time commitment for your research? How many hours a week do you think you dedicate to your research weekly? And maybe what does an average day you going into the lab look?
I think honestly, it depends on like what's going on at that time. Like if you're like struggling for like getting a grant or like trying to put a paper out, like it's obviously going to entail like spending more time that specific week. But I think that most PIs are just generally like pretty chill. Like they know like if it's finals week, they're not going to expect you to do a ton of work. And like I think that's very nice. And just like, they've all been in our situation where they're undergraduates who've been like balancing research and schoolwork at the same time. So they all understand how to, you know, like balance it, and that like sometimes you're not gonna be able to commit as much time as others. And so for me personally, like if it's like a midterm week or like a finals week, I'm not going to focus a ton on research, but you know, when I have extra time, I'm definitely going to pick up the slack and like really get to it, you know, and try and get ahead even.
If you happen to join like a research program that pays you to do your research, they'll outline the expected time commitment for you. My time commitment is like 12 hours a week. Usually I spend more than that, but that's because I'm working on HPLC right now. And while I'm physically in the lab, I'm not actually doing work. I'm just waiting for the machine to clean itself. So yeah, I guess like 8 to 12 hours is what I think is normal, but you could definitely spend more or less depending on what's going on in your day to day.
Yeah, I think it like what other people mentioned earlier, it depends on what kind of research you do. For my wet lab, since I do SRP, I have to, at least I told them I'd be there, you know, at least 12 hours a week. So that's for my wet lab. And it's really nice to communicate that up front. And even when you're quote unquote interviewing with the lab, asking how long do you expect me to be in there each week? And of course that would vary for testing season and stuff like that. And for clinical research, I found that it's more task-based. So because you don't have to run experiments per se, it's more like when can you get this done by, and you kind of plan out your work accordingly. So it definitely ebbs and flows depending on what you're working on in that moment. So for clinical research, I think it's more flexible. For wet lab research, we definitely, at least I definitely have like a commitment of like X number of hours per week, because there's a certain number of things I want to get done and a certain amount of assays that I have to do, and I know how long those assays take.
Yeah, for me, at the beginning, you know, it was anywhere between 10 to 15 hours. And now I've got it down pretty much to a protocol of anywhere between 8 and 10 hours in the lab. With that being said, there's probably about 5 to 10 hours or longer, depending on if it's, you know, I'm writing up my 8-week 199 paper or my final paper that I have to submit. But outside of the lab is a lot of the time commitment for me. But then also driving and whatnot. But you know, it really just depends on what you're doing. You know, for me, if I'm growing plants and have to image them as they're doing, taking a growth series, imaging them as their leaves are growing, you know, I'm going to be in the lab more often. But if I am just waiting for some plants to grow to a certain point and then needing to image them at that specific point, then it's going to be much less, or whatever the case may be. And it's going to be different for everybody's work. But yeah, I mean, everyone's going to feel that there's going to be variances within the amount of time they're going to be in the lab.
Okay. So yeah, I had a question. I'm Harjis. I'm the managing editor of Review. And I wanted to ask the panelists, what's a skill that you guys, after joining a lab, found is really important for research? And I guess, like, how can people help develop that skill?
Honestly, I feel like just being able to read a research paper, and like I know it sounds like kind of stupid, like, oh yeah, like anyone can read, like you can read a research paper, but being able to like seriously like analyze it and just like understand what it's saying is so critical. And I remember like when I first joined my lab as like a freshman, I like read papers and I was like, what is this saying? Like I have no idea. And like I would get it and I have to read it a few times to like really understand. And I think that just like, you know, like being involved in research and like really helps you like improve that comprehension. And just like now I'll be able to read a research paper like so much faster. And you know, I think that's like a vital skill for everyone to have.
Being able to like formulate your own protocols helps, because the method sections of most papers are really succinct, almost too succinct. So they will not tutor you or like walk you through the exact method that they used. So it's up to you and your lab to figure out exactly what steps you need to follow to complete that procedure.
I think for me, it's organization. I like growing up, my room was always so messy. And even when I like cook or bake, there's things flying everywhere, you know, and that, you know, translates to the bench as well. Like keeping your bench top clean, and you know how like chefs always they keep their counter clean. It's kind of the same thing. And that goes to like compiling data as well, just recording everything that you've done that day. It's really important to keep a lab notebook, and developing those organized habits really saves you time. It saves you so much time in the long runs, where you don't have to flip out all your papers and turn your desk upside down to find that one note that you took like 2 weeks ago. And organization, I think, is really, really important, and it's such a time saver later on.
For me, it has to definitely be learning how to not only develop your own protocols, but how to really develop a research project in some way or another. I mean, your PI is going to have a general guidance for you of what you're going to want to do, especially at an undergraduate level. But being able to take that and kind of, everything from how to develop your own protocols to how to develop your own processing, if you will. I don't know, for some undergraduates or for a lot of researchers, you have to deal with image processing through programs like ImageJ. And figuring out how to work a program like that is, it can be a challenge in itself, but then using the tools within it are another challenge. Then analyzing the data you get from those tools is another thing. So getting familiar with how to figure out how to do these things and where to find the appropriate resources has been a huge help. And I know that it's going to carry on to the rest of my research career.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time. So if any of the audience members have anything else they wanted to ask, we can stick around for a little bit. But again, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all of your experiences with us. This was really interesting for me, and hopefully for everyone else in the audience too. Jessica, do you want to add any final words?
No, but basically just everything you said. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I know some of you guys had classes, and it's just thank you for dedicating your time, not only to USJ, but also to research.